TechDaily.ai, your source for technical information. This podcast is sponsored by Stonefly, your trusted solution provider and advisor in enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, hyper-converged in VMware, Hyper-V, Proxmox cluster AI servers, and public and private cloud. Check out stonefly.com or email your project requirements to sales@stonefly.com. Okay, let's get into this deep dive. Ransomware attackers, they are just, well, relentless, always pushing, always looking for that gap.
Absolutely. And we saw a really interesting example recently with the Akira Group, shows how creative they're getting.
Yeah, creative and persistent.
Yeah.
Because their first attempt, it actually failed, didn't it?
It did, yeah. The target had endpoint detection and response software, EDR, and it worked.
So the EDR, like the security guard, it spotted the ransomware, stopped it, quarantined it. Job done, you'd think.
You would. But that wasn't the end, not at all. They just, they pivoted.
Didn't give up.
Yeah.
So what was the pivot? How did they switch gears?
Well, after that initial block, the attacker got a remote desktop session going. RDP. Like remotely controlling a machine.
Okay, RDP.
Yeah.
But instead of going after the main servers again.
Exactly. They started looking around the network, sort of probing for other, maybe less obvious vulnerabilities.
And they found one. This is the really interesting part.
Yeah, they found a Linux webcam.
A webcam. Seriously. Not a server, not a workstation, but a camera.
Mm-hmm. A Linux webcam. Apparently, it had a known vulnerability, something that hadn't been patched.
Wow. So they exploited that weakness in the camera.
Precisely. They used that vulnerable webcam as like a launchpad to then deploy the ransomware onto the network.
That just goes to show, doesn't it? The attack surface is so much wider than people might think. It's not just computers.
It really is. All these connected devices, IoT, operational technology, they're all potential entry points, especially if they're not managed securely. This wasn't just about one camera. It signals a bigger trend.
There's a quote from Steve Ross, a cybersecurity director, that seems really relevant here. He mentioned attacks getting more complex, barriers to entry lowering, and attackers getting, well, super creative.
That sums it up perfectly. The landscape is definitely shifting.
So thinking about this whole incident, what's the first big lesson for everyone listening?
I think takeaway number one has got to be, you absolutely need to manage and secure all your connected devices, your IoT, your OT stuff, not just the usual suspects.
Right, you can't just ignore the smart thermostat or the webcam. Okay, so that's number one. What else?
Number two is reinforcing something we talk about a lot, but it's critical. Patch and vulnerability management. It's still so important.
And crucially, extending that patching to these IoT and OT devices too, right?
Absolutely. That unpatched webcam, that was the open door. If it had been updated, this whole thing might have played out very differently. Or not at all.
Makes sense. So manage all devices, patch everything. What's the third key point?
The third thing is effective attack surface management. Things like network restrictions, segmentation.
How would that have helped here?
Well, if that webcam, once compromised, was on a segmented part of the network, isolated, the attacker couldn't have easily used it to jump, laterally and spread the ransomware to more critical systems. It limits the blast radius.
Got it. So even if one thing gets compromised, it doesn't automatically mean the whole network goes down.
Exactly. It's about layers of defense. The EDR was one layer, patching is another, segmentation is yet another. You need that defense in-depth approach.
Okay, so let's quickly recap. Attackers are persistent, they're creative, and they will look for unexpected weaknesses, like IoT devices.
Which means your security strategy has to be comprehensive. Include those IoT-OT devices, keep everything patched, and manage your attack surface smartly with things like segmentation.
It definitely gives you something to think about.
It does. So maybe the final thought for you listening is this. Take a mental inventory. Think about all the connected devices in your environment, the printers, the cameras, the sensors, everything. Are they actually covered by your security plan? Or could one of them be an overlooked backdoor waiting for someone to find?
A really important question. TechDaily.ai, your source for technical information. This podcast is sponsored by Stonefly, your trusted solution provider and advisor in enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, hyper-converged in VMware, Hyper-V, Proxmox cluster, AI servers, and public and private cloud. Check out stonefly.com or email your project requirements to sales@stonefly.com.